Final ending to the getaway, part 1 down below. Melinda, he's married, and your mother. She's being unfaithful, I declared loudly. My mother was caught with Russell Eddington in my dad's bed by me. She doesn't deserve him. I can't let him be hurt by anyone. They're getting a divorce. That's the reason she had to leave her job. I can't bear to be around her. That's why I never seek her advice on anything. And my dad will be devastated when he learns the truth. The best thing I can do is to find someone more suitable for him. Someone who can support him through the upcoming tough times and then help him to move forward. You're ideal for that, ma'am. And the reason he hasn't noticed you is that he genuinely believes he's loyal to a woman who's worth his fidelity. As lovely as you are, my dad just isn't the type to betray. We just need to arrange a few meetings for you two. Returning home, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began. I felt like celebrating, as if I should light a cigar and exclaim, I love it when a plan comes together. That's why I was taken aback when things started to unravel with my supposedly flawless plan. Melinda, what are you trying to do? My mother demanded angrily. You're correct, I saw you at the park on Saturday. I was worried you'd tell your dad. I watched you introduce him to the sophisticated lady, and then you had the audacity to bring her into my house. Helping you with your wardrobe is supposed to be my role. And your mother, did you know she's a lesbian? She inquired. I burst into laughter. She's not a lesbian, I chuckled. You must have heard that from Eddington, right? No, she's not a lesbian. She's just selective with her choices. She believes she has more dignity than to be with just any man who shows interest. Besides, Teresa, I was doing this for you. What do you mean? She asked with curiosity. I saw an opportunity. This wasn't my initial plan, but it might just work. Do you recall our talk about making amends to Dad? I queried. She nodded with enthusiasm. The only way to balance things out is if Dad has a fling too. Then everything will be square, and we can be a family again. I'm tired of this hostility, Mother. I miss us. So, if your father gets involved with her briefly, this whole ordeal ends, and you won't tell him? She probed. And you'll forgive me too. That was the idea, I confessed. But it's futile. Dad didn't show any interest in her. He was more intrigued by her car than by her. I'll assist you, she offered. No one understands your father like I do. We need to create opportunities for them to interact closely. When it's time to act, we might consider having your dad in a more relaxed state, perhaps a bit tipsy. Let me ponder over it while I prepare dinner. We can make this work. She beamed, gesturing for a high five. I can't believe how naive she is, I mused as she exited the room. The following day at school, I confided in Ms. Abra, or Helena as I preferred to call her since we were in this scheme together, about the latest plans. I shared my mother's initial strategy to foster a connection between them. The idea was to host a party that would also serve as a rehearsal for the Harvest Festival dance, mainly to help the younger students practice the formal dancing required at the festival. Unlike their usual freestyle dancing, this would be structured and partner-based. I managed to get Helena to volunteer as a chaperone and hinted that I would try to convince my dad as well. At the event, my plan was to subtly encourage them to dance together, progressing our plan to unite them. Ironically, the scheme originated from my mother, which felt like she was unwittingly setting herself up for disappointment. As the dance approached, my mother's excitement grew, although our conversations were minimal. However, we did discuss her thoughts on the post-dance events. On the evening of the dance, there was a special atmosphere. My mother insisted on adorning my hair with a flower as I awaited Dean's arrival. Both my father and I were taken aback by her decision not to attend. I was upset and confronted her. I had hoped she would be there, enduring the discomfort of seeing my father dance with the younger, more attractive Helena. Helena and I concurred that my mother's actions belied any claim of love for my father. Her betrayal was the first misstep. If she truly loved him, she wouldn't have strayed. Her second misstep was her denial upon being discovered. Lastly, her willingness to facilitate and organize such a situation proved her detachment. She had lost all right to my father's affection. Her alleged love should have made her distraught at the mere thought of him with another woman. I confronted her in the kitchen, with Dad upstairs and Dean in the living room, demanding, "Why aren't you joining? Go upstairs and get ready, now." "Melinda, it's best if I don't go," she explained. "Think about it. You're the smart one here. Your father is so reserved. He wouldn't feel comfortable dancing with Helena in my presence. He'd see it as disrespectful to me. Plus, you need to persuade him that Helena feels left out because no one else dances with her. Without that, he won't approach her, regardless of her looks." I had to acknowledge she was making sense. I hadn't considered how to encourage him to dance with Helena. What I missed was how clever my mother had been. I was only 18 and couldn't grasp all these nuances. My mother was quite astute. As Dean and I headed to the dance, he attempted to chat, but my thoughts were elsewhere. There were numerous potential complications. I held Dean's hand. His relaxed nature reminded me of my dad, which was part of why I adored him. Dean shared my father's dedication to causes, ideas, and people. However, Dean wouldn't face the same issues with unfaithfulness as my dad. The school looked the same, despite the busy parking lot. We had stopped at Dean's place for photos, and I had unfairly compared his mom to a farm animal, which was harsh and unjustified. Approaching the entrance, I heard a loud engine and smiled. That sounds like your dad's car, Dean remarked. I laughed and corrected him. No, that's not his, I replied. Soon, an even louder engine sound followed, and the driver revved as he entered the lot. That's my dad's car, I declared. The two cars arrived simultaneously, parking near Dean's car, seemingly by chance. However, to me, it felt like a positive sign, as if the universe supported this gathering. I noticed Ms. Aber exchanging glances with my dad, who clumsily handled his keys. Suddenly, Coach rushed to Helena's car, attempting to open her door, which was locked. After several tries, she rolled down her window to inquire about his actions. I'm just trying to be courteous, he grinned. Thought we'd start the evening right, since we'll be spending a lot of time together. We're not on the same page here, she said coolly. Your remark was completely out of line for the workplace. It was unprofessional and could be grounds for a complaint if... Hi Helena, my dad interrupted. Sorry to bother you, but could you point me to the gym? You're the football coach, right? He asked Coach, extending his hand in greeting. I've heard good things about the team. There's talk you might actually win a game this year. When Helena unlocked her car and got out, everyone in the parking lot seemed to turn and look. Helena was dressed in an elegant off-white dress that fit her perfectly. She wore a pearl necklace and had a large flower in her hair, similar to mine. She caught my dad's gaze and said, Hi Jim. I'd be happy to show you around. It's preferred to have chaperones in pairs, so if we spot any trouble, we can manage it effectively. Let me just grab my bag. She reached back into her car for her stylish off-white clutch. Linking arms with my dad, she headed into the building. I hurried after them with Dean, curious about what would unfold. As they entered, they drew many eyes. Helena, in particular, seemed to become the center of silent scrutiny. Most of the women there seemed to envy her immediately. She challenged the existing norms as soon as she walked in. Her presence was notably impactful among the women. The staff and volunteer mothers had seemingly reconciled with the idea that their allure differed from that of the younger students, attributing it to age. They believed that their appeal had matured into a different kind. But Helena disrupted these notions. She matched the students in vibrancy and the mothers in age, overturning their accepted standards. She and my dad seemed like a natural pair. I admired how my dad had come to her aid with the coach, who was still fuming behind them. We're here, you're safe now, my dad said with a reassuring smile. As he started to leave, I sensed something was amiss. Jim, she called out gently. Where are you going? I just wanted to get you away from that annoying guy, he explained. I need to check on Kit. She grabbed his arm again. You saved me, so now you're stuck with me. You've been great with Melinda, but she needs her own space. She's capable and strong. Maybe it's us who need a bit of attention now. My dad looked puzzled but joined her at the table. Then, just when I thought my plan was falling apart, we heard the sound of a car engine from my dad's jacket. He grinned and took out his iPhone. Helena glanced at me, and I just shrugged. Oh, hi honey, he greeted, feeling better. He laughed, listened, then grew silent. I thought he'd rush off to her, game over. She had outsmarted me. But, at least, I made him notice Helena. He signaled for me to come closer. I'm in a bind, he confessed. Your mom thinks Helena is upset because she only gets attention from the wrong guys. I've seen that coach, not a nice guy. Your mom thinks I should dance with Helena. How am I supposed to do that? Don't worry, Dad, I reassured him. Just be yourself. It's just a dance, not a proposal. Although the DJ wasn't fully ready, he played a song and many headed to the dance floor. Dean and I danced, and while spinning around, I kept an eye on our table. When Dean and I got back, a man approached Helena, asking her to dance. I'd love to, she replied with a smile, but I've already committed my dances to someone who hasn't asked me yet. He's a fool then, the man remarked. Before Helena could respond, the DJ started another song, featuring a warbling female voice with a captivating Irish tone. I'm eagerly waiting for your arrival. Just a gentle touch, and I feel a flutter of excitement. Come on, Jim, they're playing our song, Helena exclaimed. We have a song, my dad replied, puzzled. As they stepped onto the dance floor, I tuned into the music. Hearing the chorus, I couldn't suppress a chuckle. Helena was clearly setting the mood. The song urged, so go on, come on, leave me breathless. Challenge me, playfully coax me until I can't resist this wonderful sensation. Make me yearn for your embrace. Go on, come on, leave me breathless. Watching them dance, I saw my dad's initial bewilderment transform into a contented smile, signaling that everything was going to be just fine. Helena, with her graceful movements, drew him closer with each step. Their moments off the dance floor were filled with laughter and engaging conversations. Helena shone with joy, commanding the attention of many, yet her focus remained steadfast on my dad. Catching my eye, she wordlessly communicated, breathless, acknowledging the night's enchanting spell. Despite my dad's obliviousness, he was experiencing an almost perfect evening. The night progressed smoothly until it was disrupted. The punch seemed tampered with, leading to Coach's disruptive drunkenness. He approached our table, targeting Helena and my dad, his presence imposing. With a stern expression, he interrupted their joyful interaction, demanding Helena's attention, frustrated by how my dad had captivated her throughout the evening. You've misunderstood, Coach, she stated. I've been keeping him to myself. Can you imagine how many ladies were hoping for a dance with him? Yet, he declined them all. As the coach's face became a portrait of fury, my father rose, positioning himself protectively between Helena and the coach. Listen, friend, the coach started, sympathy lacing his words. I get that it's tough, and I empathize. But just because there's trouble in your marriage doesn't give you the right to interfere with my relationship, and I. Before he could finish, my father's fist met the coach's face with such speed and force that the man was sent flying, landing hard on the ground, unconscious. A storm of confusion, fury, and distress played across my father's features as he scanned his surroundings in bewilderment. I was speechless and motionless. This scenario had never crossed my mind. I hadn't anticipated anyone other than myself revealing the bitter truth to my dad. Yet, here we were, the evening ruined by a spiteful, intoxicated fool. Just as I believed the situation couldn't worsen, it did. 3 police officers made their way through the throng toward my dad. He extended his hands for the cuffs, but they merely gave him a puzzled look. "Sir, are you James Carson?" inquired one officer. With a nod from my dad, it was clear he was reeling from the shock. "We need you to accompany us, please," the officer continued. "Do I need to wait until the station to contact my attorney?" my father inquired. The officers exchanged glances, perplexed. "Sir, the altercation isn't our concern. This is a private event, and such matters are typically handled by security. We're here because there's been an accident involving your wife." "Was she hurt in a fall?" my dad queried. "She was in a car accident, not as the driver. The individual with her sustained significant injuries," explained the officer. Helena stepped in, saying, "We'll follow you, Jim." I was thankful for her taking charge, as I was still in a daze and filled with sorrow for my dad. My carefully laid plans, all aimed at shielding him from pain, had spectacularly failed. Dean and Helena led me out of the school, under the watchful eyes of everyone. Helena handed me her keys and instructed me to follow her. She jumped into my dad's car and sped off in pursuit of the ambulance. The tires screeched loudly as she drove away, but she quickly regained control. I followed her as instructed, with Dean trailing behind me. I was consumed with thoughts about how my mother could have been involved in a car accident, especially since she was supposed to be at home. Arriving at the hospital, we were ushered into a waiting area near the emergency department, then to a room on the 3rd floor close to the surgery suites. This proximity unnerved me. There I was, anxious about my mom's surgery, yet I found myself preoccupied with thoughts about my dad and how this event might disrupt my plans involving him. Dean was his usual supportive self, but what really surprised me was Helena's reaction. She was visibly distressed, more than I anticipated. Offering her a comforting embrace, I assured her that everything would be all right. While we sat there, a woman with 2 children entered and greeted Helena before sitting across the room. Helena barely acknowledged her, her focus fixed on the door. In my seat, I mentally explored every possible scenario and its ramifications. My worst fear was that this accident might rekindle the bond between my mom and dad. I could imagine them having emotional reconciliations by her hospital bed, leading to him forgiving her. She might even reveal that I knew everything, potentially destroying my bond with the person I cherished most. Despite my meticulous planning, the situation was spiraling into chaos. Suddenly, the doors to the surgery area opened, and a doctor emerged, followed by my dad. Helena immediately rushed towards my dad, embracing him while he continued talking to the doctor. What struck me most was my dad's expression. He was visibly trying to stay composed, but anger was evident. I moved closer to overhear their conversation. I caught snippets of their discussion about the accident's impact and the potential need for extensive medical intervention. The unfolding events and the snippets of conversation I overheard added layers of complexity and concern to an already tense situation. Then I heard, "Jaw snapped shut," and that was the end of it. Those words painted a vivid picture for me. Perhaps it's a bit twisted, but I couldn't help myself. I spun around and dashed out of the waiting room. I bolted to the nearest bathroom, ensuring it was vacant, and then I burst into uncontrollable laughter. It was a solid 5 minutes of raucous amusement before I managed to compose myself, the memory of calling him spineless during our heated exchange in his office replaying in my mind. Upon my return to the waiting room, I walked into a tense discussion. "Listen to me, if you insist on handling this your way, you're setting yourself up for a lifetime of regret," my dad asserted, standing firm while Helena gently urged him to sit back down. "I don't care," he retorted, "she's on my insurance plan. I'm done here. I don't want to engage with her. I just want her out of my life." Helena coaxed him back into his seat, and he yielded. "Darling, I know you're averse to talking to her, and that's precisely why you should." Completely cutting her off. "It's just not feasible," she explained. He looked at her, and she embraced him. "If you leave this hospital with the intention of erasing her from your life, avoiding any contact, it's not going to pan out. Perhaps the legalities could be sorted by your attorneys, sparing you from any direct communication. One of you will end up with the house, and theoretically, you could avoid each other forever, akin to those stories you hear about online divorces, right?" He nodded in agreement. "It's futile, Jim," she continued. Her words seemed to soothe my father. I noticed a woman across the room hanging on to Helena's every word as well. In the real world, long-term relationships create bonds. Among these, the most significant is your shared daughter, whose milestones will inevitably bring you together. Can you really say you'd skip Melinda's wedding just to avoid her mother? Or would you be so heartless as to deny her mother the joy of witnessing her daughter's big day? My dad pouted and crossed his arms. Helena then reached for his hand again, intertwining their fingers. I wasn't ready to let go of your hand just yet, she remarked. No matter how you feel about her, there's another issue at hand, she continued. Even if you decide to cut her out of your life and steer clear, you're faced with the need for resolution. Experts often refer to it as closure. I'm not fond of that term because when it comes to human interactions and emotion, things don't just end neatly. Years down the line, even after you think you've resolved it all, there will still be numerous unanswered questions. But for your peace of mind, to prevent a lifetime of self-doubt, you need to have a conversation with her. Darn, I thought. My concerns had been about Helena's lack of assertiveness and my dad's passive behavior. Suddenly, everything escalated so fast that, after a brief absence, I was out of the loop. Helena was talking about their future together as if it was certain, and my dad wasn't objecting. This was what I had hoped for, yet it unfolded in an unexpected manner. I shouldn't be upset, I reasoned. My aim was to distance my dad from my unfaithful mother and connect him with someone who would cherish him and be deserving of his affection, and it seemed he was on track to find the right partner. I just needed to ensure everything aligned. Then again, I'm stepping back. It's time to let fate take its course. Life has a knack for setting things right eventually. Now, you're too anxious and on edge, Helena remarked. Cut back on the coffee. In fact, I want you to go for a long drive to unwind. Then return here and we'll face this together. She's in surgery for another hour, right? She'll need time to recover after that. So take a moment for yourself. But you can't just ignore this situation. I expect you back here in an hour. But what about? He started. Melinda and I have it covered, she assured. We'll handle the paperwork and anything else that's needed. I gave him an encouraging smile. He approached and enveloped me in a comforting hug. I sat beside Helena. Go for that drive, Dad, I urged. Helena is right. Driving always helps you relax. As my dad moved towards the door, a woman across the room caught his sleeve. I'm really sorry for your distress, she expressed with sorrow. My dad just nodded, barely registering her words. That's when I recognized her as Russell Eddington's wife. As soon as I sat down, Helena spoke. Melinda, I thought you were the master planner, she began. But it seems your mother has outsmarted us all. She deceived your dad into believing she was ill and avoided the dance. She suggested to you that if she attended, your dad would be too bashful to dance with me, right? I nodded, trying to piece together her point. The call that your dad received during the dance was from her, Helena explained. I figured as much, I replied, relieved she had called since it led to my dad dancing with you. Don't be so thankful, Helena cautioned. She made the call to ensure you both were at the dance, giving her a chance to sneak away with Russell. They planned to go to a motel this time, avoiding the risk of being caught at your place again. According to the doctor and the police report from the accident scene, your mom and Russell had an accident while heading to the motel. The crash happened because Russell wasn't paying attention to the road, leading to a collision with a tree. Thankfully, the airbags deployed, and Russell was mostly unharmed, except for a significant, rather delicate injury, she snickered. Your mom suffered severe facial injuries, with extensive damage and a potential concussion. The impact caused a severe reaction, resulting in broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a twisted spine. It's miraculous she didn't have a spinal cord injury. They believe she'll eventually walk again. I can't stand the thought of her betraying him once more, I vented. Helena, Dad was right, we're better off without her. A woman across the room chimed in. Some people can't resist temptation. Confused, I responded, I don't get it, ma'am. You're stunning, with a lovely family. Why would he stray? It's not just my problem, she revealed, hinting at a pattern. But that might end now. Helena, he never involved you, right? Helena dismissed the notion disdainfully. But he made attempts, didn't he? The wife prodded. Helena confirmed with a nod. Russell would chase anyone if he had the chance, but at least he's financially stable, which my daughters and I need. I planned to leave him once the kids were older, but with these recent events and the potential divorce and legal battles, I might have to secure our future sooner. It's unfortunate how this affects your family, she sympathized. As she spoke, an idea suddenly occurred to me. Shortly afterward, my father returned. Dean informed his parents he was heading home, shared a brief embrace and peck with me, and bid farewell to all. My father took the seat Dean had vacated beside me. I moved to the opposite side, nudging him closer to Helena, who quickly took his hand. We engaged in light conversation, steering clear of the recent incident. As time passed, I drifted into sleep. Awakening to a gentle tap from a nurse, I realized I had fallen asleep leaning on my father, who was also sleeping, head tilted back, with Helena resting similarly against his other shoulder, her arm securely around his. The nurse announced that the person was out of surgery, advising us to visit quickly due to the impending effects of the pain medication. I roused my father and Helena, intrigued by the nurse's reference to them as my parents, which somehow felt appropriate. Upon reaching the designated hospital floor, we were informed of the visiting protocol. My father initially approached the room but was halted by Helena, who cautioned him to temper his emotions due to the patient's fragile state post-surgery. He reluctantly agreed, showcasing Helena's calming influence. After a brief visit by my father, I entered the room. The patient was heavily bandaged, with various medical apparatus in place to aid recovery and prevent movement. A specialized contraption was fitted to her head to restrict jaw movement. As I moved around the room, her eyes followed me. I greeted her tenderly, inquiring about her well-being, to which she responded with a faint sound, indicating her current state of distress. I warned you that if you betrayed him again, there would be consequences. You didn't heed my warning, so this divorce is on you. Alone with you, Mom, I can admit my true feelings. I've been planning this since the day I discovered your betrayal. I've been searching for the right person to support Dad once I leave for college. Helena is the perfect match. I'm grateful for your unwitting role in bringing them together. She's ready to take over from here. Your expression widened in shock, your mouth unable to move, seemingly causing you discomfort at the mere attempt. You owe Helena a debt of gratitude. Without her, Dad wouldn't have come to visit you, I remarked, noting your angry glare. Don't be mad at me, Mom. I didn't instigate this, although I almost wish I had. Dad learned about your affair with Eddington, but I wasn't the informant. He discovered the truth just before we were confronted. And it wasn't the authorities who showed up, but the coach. Furious about Dad and Helena, he drunkenly blurted out that you were unfaithful, leading to Dad confronting him publicly, which caught everyone's attention, including his team. This made me wonder how the coach knew of your actions. Given his and the principal's strained relations, it led me to suspect you were involved with the coach as well. I looked into your eyes, and you couldn't meet my gaze. I just shook my head in disbelief. What's going on, Mom? Are you trying to create a scandalous reputation for yourself? It seems my time is up. I doubt I'll visit often. Goodbye, Mom. Outside, Dad thanked Helena. I owe you a lot, Helena, he said, clearly still processing everything. Talking to her is something I'm unsure I can manage. Even now, just thinking about her and Eddington frustrates me. He paused, taking a breath to calm down. Sorry if this spoiled your evening. Let's head home, Kit, he said, then hesitated. Helena drove me here. Yes, and I drove her car. She gave you your keys back, I reminded him. Have you still got my keys, Melinda? Helena inquired. I confirmed with a nod. All right, we'll see you back at the house. Dad looked surprised but followed along, having listened to her throughout the evening. When we arrived home, I immediately went to change and then to bed. I could still hear their voices as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, after showering, I went downstairs for breakfast. My dad was napping on the sofa, snoring softly. In the kitchen, I found Helena cooking. She was at the stove, managing 2 pans, one with bacon sizzling and the other with pancakes browning. What caught my attention was her attire. She wore my dad's University of Michigan sweatshirt, and it seemed like that was all. I borrowed a few items, she mentioned, not wanting to disturb my sleep earlier. Her choice of clothing puzzled me until I realized she wanted to catch my dad's attention with familiar items. Helena shared that they had spent the night talking, trying to support my dad through a tough time. She had been open with him about her feelings and actions, explaining that she had been following him around since their first encounter during a nature walk. She worried this made her appear untrustworthy, like she was pursuing a married man, which wasn't her intention. Her earnestness convinced me she was a good fit for our family. It's okay, Helena, I reassured her. We'll sort everything out after breakfast. She then continued cooking, and I helped her with the breakfast preparations. Post-breakfast, Helena borrowed my sweatpants, choosing a pair that matched the sweatshirt she was wearing. She organized a picnic for us, despite my dad's protests. We returned to the woods where the earlier event had taken place, openly discussing our feelings and experiences. Helena confessed her attraction to my dad, which was complicated by his unresolved feelings about my mom's past actions. Despite the tension, he acknowledged Helena's attractiveness, hinting at his own feelings of affection, overshadowed by his lingering hurt. Helena inquired about Dean's absence, and I explained that it was Sunday, so he'd be at church until the afternoon. After leaving the park, we received a call from the hospital stating that my mom wanted to see my dad. He provided the nurse with Grandma's contact and then we headed home, making a detour at Helena's place for her to grab some clothes. My dad questioned how long she planned to stay. Helena just gave him a meaningful look. We spent the rest of the day watching movies and unwinding. Dean joined us post-church, and we all enjoyed a cozy evening filled with films, conversation, laughter, and food. I noticed Helena staying close to my dad throughout. The following day marked a return to our usual routines. I had schoolwork and exams to focus on. Oddly, my peers seemed unusually attentive towards me, with teammates playfully jesting and mimicking punches. The confusion cleared up by noon. The rumors about the school dance were unclear, but the visible aftermath involved our coach, who ended up in the hospital with a tailbone injury. Later, an assembly was called where the vice principal informed us about Principal Eddington's accident and his subsequent hospitalization. She emphasized continuity in his absence and urged us to keep him in our thoughts, a sentiment I felt detached from. Questions arose about the principal's return and the severity of his injuries, sparking inappropriate humor in me about the situation's irony. Back home, with time on my hands before my dad's return, I decided to cook dinner. Surprisingly, Helena showed up. She entered, surveyed the kitchen, and asked about the meal plan. I mentioned preparing burgers for my dad to grill later, and she showed interest in helping with the side dishes. I just shrugged. How about a big salad? She suggested. We'll throw in a bit of everything we find. If you don't like it, don't add it to your plate. That sounds great, I replied. She fetched a large bowl, and we started cutting up various vegetables, onions, and mushrooms. Do you think he'd mind if I joined him for a run? She inquired. I'm sure he'd be thrilled, I responded. And she was excited. When my dad returned, she was ready in her athletic gear, looking refreshed. After their run, they showered and we all enjoyed dinner together. The conversation flowed, skillfully steering clear of the unspoken tension. Helena brought up an issue with her car losing power occasionally. Post-dinner, Dad inspected her car in the garage, while Helena sorted through some documents nearby. My grandmother called, inquiring about visiting. Dad assured her she was always welcome. Upon her arrival, Helena excused herself for a bath. My grandmother, puzzled about Dad's absence from the hospital, quizzed me about it. She was unaware of the extent of the accident involving my mom. I know there was an accident, and a car was damaged, but it wasn't yours. Why the upset? She questioned. Dad detailed the accident and the aftermath to my grandmother, causing her distress. She apologized, and he expressed his commitment to ensuring proper care for my mom, despite his unresolved feelings. After the visit, my grandmother departed, visibly disturbed. At the Harvest Festival dance, the scene was different, me with Dean, and Dad with Helena. Helena's elegance at the rehearsal was outshone by her presence at the dance. Their status as a couple was clear, deterring others from approaching Helena for a dance. 2 reasons stood out: Helena's constant closeness to my dad and the lingering chatter about a previous incident, warning others off. The night was enjoyable, allowing Helena to display her sociable, charismatic side without unwanted attention. Her demeanor transformed post-dance, shedding her professional facade for a more relaxed persona, drawing more attention but remaining devoted to Dad. She often visited him at work, eager for their moments together. The following weeks unfolded in a consistent pattern. Both my father and Helena assured me they were willing to accompany me to the hospital, or if I preferred, I could drive there alone using either my mother's car or the Jeep my father used in winter. Helena and my father were inseparable, except when obligations like work necessitated their absence from each other, and of course, during their separate sleeping hours. Their relationship seemed innocent, almost reminiscent of teenage love. I rarely observed any displays of affection between them. I was aware of Helena's affection for my father, but his feelings were ambiguous until one evening he returned home to find Helena absent. He searched the house and yard silently, prompting me to keep my observations to myself. In secret, I recorded his frantic search throughout the house and his repeated glances out the window. When Helena finally returned, he acted as if everything was normal, greeting her casually before retreating to the garage. Helena's puzzled look directed at me prompted her to inquire about my silence regarding the parent-teacher conferences that day. I explained that it was time for my father to move forward, to acknowledge the absence of my mother who had been hospitalized for over a month without our visitation. Helena offered to accompany me to see her, but I declined, expressing a lack of desire to visit. Helena speculated that my father might feel the same reluctance. The tension rose as I mentioned the necessity for my father to address his marital situation, given the ongoing communication from my mother and the potential escalation once she regained her ability to speak. I also hinted at the budding relationship between him and Helena, suggesting that his feelings for her were quite strong, a fact that seemed to both surprise and fluster Helena. I really like him, she confessed. I know, I replied. He's just scared to accept that he feels the same about you. But how can we be sure? She questioned. Maybe I'm just a family friend to him. I showed her the video I had captured of him pacing through the house, peeking into every room, and frequently checking the window. What was he searching for? She inquired with a smile. You, Helena, I responded with a grin. He's in denial, but he missed you terribly. It's time for him to face the truth and move forward. Let's hold on to that thought, she said. The time is now. I observed her as she walked to the kitchen, then exited through the door to the garage. My dad was there, engrossed in his car. I never quite understood his obsession with it, almost as if he conversed with it. She approached him, tapped his shoulder, and he turned around. She embraced him and kissed him. Initially, he was motionless, but then he reciprocated, wrapping his arms around her. Watching them made me question my own choices and commitments. It was a stirring moment for me. Principal Eddington resumed his duties at school the next day, and the coach returned the week after, moving with a noticeable slowness. Eddington stayed secluded in his office, now with a new secretary, his wife, who always greeted me warmly. She inquired about my mother, showing genuine concern. My response highlighted my mother's ongoing recovery, mentioning the need for her upcoming facial surgery due to the injuries she sustained. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone awaiting my father's next move, especially with the potential implications for Eddington's career amid the divorce talks. The coach kept his distance from Helena, appearing uneasy, as if anticipating my father's retaliation. Despite his tough exterior at school, the situation had evidently humbled him, and he even sent Helena an apology, seeking to amend his past actions. Helena and my father were in a state of limbo. She was almost a constant presence in our home, yet they maintained a platonic relationship. Many nights, I stumbled upon them asleep on the sofa, fully clothed, holding each other tightly, as if they found solace in each other's embrace. The standstill finally broke. Answering the phone absent-mindedly, I was startled to hear my mother's voice. "Hello, Melinda, can I speak to your father?" I handed the phone to him, still in disbelief. His demeanor shifted as he took the call, speaking briefly before hanging up. Helena, sensing the gravity, took his hand, and he managed a tense smile. "No more delays," he said, "it's time to face things." The next day, he visited her. He later shared, and my grandmother confirmed, that she had been sitting upright, visibly thinner, with makeup concealing her injuries. She confronted him aggressively, only to realize her old tactics were futile. "James, it's disappointing you waited so long to visit," she criticized. "How can we mend our marriage without communication? I admit my grave error, but we need time and perhaps professional help to heal. I've been seeing a therapist here, maybe next visit, you and Melinda could join for a family session." My father responded silently, placing a set of documents by her bed. She glanced at them and burst into tears. "We can't end it like this, we need to discuss our issues," she protested. He urged her to explain her actions, the pain they caused, and the deceit she continued despite promises to stop. Her pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears. Melinda heard those promises too, he pointed out, concluding the conversation and advising her to seek legal counsel. The following day, she received her divorce papers in the hospital. My grandmother recounted that a young-looking woman, nonchalantly chewing gum and holding a folder, delivered them. "Teresa Carson?" she inquired. My mother, resigned, accepted them, marking the start of a contentious legal battle. My mother refused to accept the divorce and even brought her own accusations. She alleged that my father had allowed his new partner, Helena, to move into our home, which was, in fact, true. Helena was distraught over these developments. The day the allegations surfaced, she returned to her own apartment, which she hadn't visited in a long time. However, my father soon brought her back, insisting that her place was with our family. The conflict continued for several weeks. I reached a breaking point and inquired about my father's next meeting with my mother and her legal team, which was scheduled for the following day. That evening, I met with my mother to convey that her relationship with my father was irretrievably broken, and that civility in their separation was the best outcome. The situation had deteriorated to the point where my father retracted his initial settlement proposal, offering nothing instead. His demands were clear: he wanted the house, full custody of me, and for my mother to exit his life without any financial support, blaming her for the turmoil. He was also intent on pursuing legal action against Mr. Eddington. I arranged a meeting with Mr. Eddington and his wife, joining my father, Helena, and my mother's legal representatives. I proposed a solution where Mr. Eddington would provide alimony to my mother for 4 years and offer her a job. This arrangement would enable her to further her education and become self-sufficient. My father would retain the house, my mother could keep her car, and take over Helena's apartment lease. In return, my father would not pursue any legal actions against Mr. Eddington, and my mother would drop any unfounded claims. Mr. Eddington was open to the proposal, seeing it as a financially favorable alternative to potential legal battles. His wife expressed gratitude, hinting at my potential future in law. However, my father felt that the agreement let the other parties off too easily, while my mother resisted, claiming coercion and fearing the loss of her family and livelihood. "Shut up, Mom, it's time to accept this deal and move on. Sure, Mr. Eddington was your boss, but don't forget who caught you in the act. If I spill what I know, your defense falls apart. Remember, you weren't even his employee when the incident happened, so there was no manipulation involved. Consider 2 more things. Just a word from me could convince Dad to drop you from his health insurance. Without it, fixing your injuries would be a financial nightmare, leaving you with lasting reminders of the accident. And let's not sugarcoat it, Mom. You didn't just leave your family behind, you discarded us. Your priorities were clear with Mr. Eddington, and that's why you don't deserve our sympathy. Push this too far, and mending fences might become an impossible dream. Make the right choice, Mom. Ease some of Dad's suffering. Let him move on." Turning to my father, I said, "Dad, you're understandably upset. You've been wronged, and I acknowledge that. But you should know, both Mom and Mr. Eddington are facing consequences. It's not perfect, but they're paying a price. Mr. Eddington, for instance, has lost a significant part of himself, facing tough surgeries with uncertain outcomes. On top of that, he'll be supporting Mom financially, easing some burden off you. Should we make his children suffer as well? They're innocent in all this. Destroying his career affects them too. His life is already tough, with a strained marriage and a challenging work environment with Mom, who blames him for our family's split. Mom's facing her own battles. She's losing her partner, her child, her home, and her social circle. Even the job she's getting from Mr. Eddington won't last. She's at a point where she needs to rebuild her life from scratch, a daunting task for anyone, especially at her age. At this point, Mom began to cry. Look at the brighter side, Dad. This could be a fresh start for you too. You're freeing yourself from a broken trust and moving past a relationship marred by betrayal. And in doing so, you're opening your life to someone new, someone genuine and loving. Isn't that a better future? Seeing my dad embrace Helena, I sensed a glimmer of hope and new beginnings in his smile. Why are you embracing her? I meant myself, I said with a playful grin. Very amusing, Kit, Helena responded. My father gave a nod of agreement. All right, I'm on board, he declared. Turning to my mother, I saw her nod before she bowed her head, tears streaming down her face again. The attorneys concurred to formalize the agreement as I proposed. The arrangement to have one unfaithful party compensate the other with alimony was unconventional, yet both parties believed it was feasible. Should a judge dismiss the arrangement, Mr. Eddington would directly send the alimony to my father, who would then transfer it to my mother. 3 days subsequent to the agreement, they convened again to finalize the paperwork. Accompanying my mother was my grandmother, while my father brought Helena and myself, and Mr. Eddington attended alone. Post-signature, my mother, overwhelmed with emotion, reached out for my father, seeking a final embrace, but Helena interjected with a firm no. About a week later, Helena approached me with a request. She handed me some cash along with her car keys, suggesting I take Becky and Dean to the cinema. It took me a moment to catch on, but then it hit me that she was seeking some privacy with my father. I chuckled and told her, "You don't need to send me away. Is this a special occasion? Are you planning something? What's the plan?" "We haven't really," she started. "Wow," I exclaimed. "I had no clue you two hadn't." "Well, I'll leave you to it." Evidently, things went smoothly because the next day they were both beaming with joy. Fast forward a few months, and here we are in the church. I find myself playing dual roles as the maid of honor and the one who gives the bride away. Thinking about it, why shouldn't I? After all, I was the one who brought them together. The only hiccup is my mother's continuous chatter. I'm puzzled as to why she was even invited, perhaps to flaunt the new union in her face, or maybe she just showed up unannounced. Regardless, the wedding had to proceed today because I'm off to college next week, and considering Helena's condition, rumored to be expecting twins, the wedding gown might not fit much longer. As the ceremony neared its close, the priest posed the traditional final question of the wedding vows. Is there any reason this man and woman should not be married? I've stepped back to stand beside my mother. As she inhales to say something, I lean close and murmur into her ear. "Mother, if you say a word, I will have to reprimand you, right here in this church." Now, this is the moment where I should say, "and they all lived happily ever after." My comments: every woman in his life is dishonest and manipulative. Speaking of being manipulated, I can't recall a single decision that he got to make for himself.